Today we're looking at the session number 5 of Nahum, looking at moving into chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. We have a title for today's session called Nineveh's Judgment Acted Out. So Nahum's going to describe this judgment in a little more detail than previously. Well, the first two verses of chapter 2 are really transitional. They're taking us from the prophesied version of Nehemiah's, Nineveh's. Where did I get Nehemiah? He's not showed up recently around here at all. The prophesied version of Nineveh's judgment from that to a vivid picture of how it will actually go down. In the upcoming portion of Nahum, we're going to see several things. First, the savage onslaught awaiting Nineveh at the hands of the Medes and Babylonians, Babylonians being the principal bad actor in this. The second, Nineveh's vain attempts to defend herself. Third, several analogies to help visualize the action itself. Fourth, the judgment from Yahweh. And finally, fifth, a declaration of such to Assyria's victims. Remember that Assyria for years, decades, even centuries, has been top dog power-wise in the region. But that's coming to an end. So there's going to be judgment to some, but mercy to others. And God is always a purveyor of judgment where it's required, and mercy where he chooses. Verse 1 concerns Nineveh directly, with verse 2 of interest to Judah. So verse 1's going to look towards Nineveh and say something. Verse 2 will look towards Judah and say something quite in contrast. The attack on Nineveh is underway in its early stages, as Nahum is going to be describing for us. Perhaps with the enemy in the suburbs of Nineveh heading for the imposing 100-foot-high city walls that are lined by a 150-foot-wide, 60-foot-deep moat, giving Nineveh a false sense of security. Hurry, hurry, hurry. This is action getting ready to defend the city. The attack is about to begin as Nahum opens up chapter 2. So let's look at chapter 2, verse 1. The one who scatters has come up against you. Now, in some translations it says the one who attacks, the attacker, has come up against you. Man the fortress. This is a call to those inside the gates to man the fortress. Watch the road. Strengthen your back. Summon all of your strength. So this is a call to scurry to the defense of our city. The word scatter again is an accurate translation, but others choose attacker. Scatter has another insight. It's wrapped up in its term, and that is scattering is to like spread seeds or is it used also to exile those inside the gates. Either way, the scatterer was to be a force of Medes and Babylonians. Nahum didn't specify that here. and principally the force was Babylonian. Babylon and Medes had come into existence as a nation, but Babylon was the one principally on the rise. And ironically, it was later that the Medes took down the Babylonians from the number one spot. But that's a later story. By the way, when God scatters, he scatters. Look at Psalm 68, verse 1. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, and let those who hate him flee before him. In other words, hating God and opposing God's not a smart choice, because he has the power to scatter you. Isaiah 24:1, for example. Behold, Yahweh lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. So, those who want to oppose Yahweh know they're going to pay a price, and that price can include scattering, devastation, death, and beyond. As we've seen on several occasions, the scatterer or the attacker was God's rod of judgment. God chooses those who will bring about his judgment. They are God-used, but not God-driven. Every time God uses an evil nation to chastise someone else, in particular his own people, he uses them through their own free choice. They choose what to do. He simply accomplishes his purpose through them. The scatterer was God's divine agent of vengeance, of retribution, a victorious king, Nebuchadnezzar, in this case. The onslaught for this began in 614 BC. The victory by Babylon was secured in 612 BC as Assyria fell, as Nineveh was destroyed. The Medes and Babylonians freely chose for their own purposes to take down Assyria. They wanted to be top dog, not Assyria. And so in doing so, they're going to accomplish God's purpose in judging Nineveh. The use of scatterer, of course, suggests exile for the defeated people of Assyria, in particular those in Nineveh. That was ironic, of course. Why? Well, because that had been Assyria's choice of methods to deal with defeated peoples. What they do again was they go in, they'll defeat a country, they'll take the country's people, most of them, except maybe the poor, somebody they need to hang around to take care of some needs of inside the country. Everyone else is scattered and exiled to other countries, and then Gentiles are chosen to go in and replace the locals. So that means that the country is no longer, for example, if it were going to be Nineveh, when they exile them out of Nineveh, then Nineveh is not an Assyrian nation again. It is a series or a collection of mixed peoples, some from Assyria, most from other nations, and so they're not an opposition to the Assyrians, which had done the swamp. What goes around comes around, so Assyria was to learn. Nahum's call to battle was, in a sense, a mocking call to Nineveh, knowing that all attempts to defend herself against Yahweh's judgment was useless. She would fall, and she would fall quickly. Listen to Nahum's urgent call again. First, man the ramparts, guard the approaches, watch the approaching roads, brace yourself for battle, marshal all the troops. It was a furtive call to protect the city. The Assyrians would be calm, collected, and confident no longer. The panic had begun, or at least when this judgment takes place, the panic would begin. Nineveh was about to undergo and experience the horror and savagery the Assyrians had been dishing out to others for hundreds of years. Payback, what goes around comes around. But then Nahum quickly shifts from his satirical call to a victory lap awaiting Judah. So he's going to go from the call of Nineveh's pending defeat, the furtive call to defend Nineveh, to this in chapter 2, verse 2. For Yahweh will restore the splendor of Jacob like the splendor of Israel. In other words, he said God's going to return Israel to at least the glory they had under David and under Solomon. The massive popularity and influence and power that Israel exuded during those years. Even though devastators have devastated Judah and destroyed their vine branches. Much of Judah had been destroyed prior and would be destroyed by Babylon, but in the end, Judah will be restored, and the entire nation of Israel will be restored. God's work in judgment of Nineveh is part of his retribution. God's exaltation of Judah is also part of that same judgment effort. For Assyria's part, in oppressing and plundering Judah, which she did in 701 BC, tried to completely do Jerusalem under, failed, of course, as we mentioned several times before. But because of what she is doing had been doing in those areas, she will shortly herself be defeated and plundered. Assyria would be laid waste, just as Assyria laid waste to her victims. All of Assyria's woes will be part of Israel's restoration, of Israel's exaltation to grand majesty. By the way, the picture of Israel as a vineyard and of Yahweh's discipline of the vineyard, you want to see that? Check the first 7 verses of Isaiah 5. Just that short bit will tell you how Yahweh judged Judah. And then see what happened to Judah when God chose to judge Israel for spiritual adultery. And of course, you can find that all over the Old Testament, because it was generally spiritual adultery that caused judgment to come to Israel. Well, next we're going to move into some details of Nineveh's judgment that's going to be played out as Yahweh summons the attacker to the scene. So we're going to go back to Nineveh and look at what happens when the Medes and the Babylonians come. Looking at Nineveh 2, verses 3 and 4. The shields of his mighty men are colored red. That was fairly typical of military dress in those days, that either their dress or their shields or both would be colored red. The shields may be colored red from blood, but they may be from some other form, such as a dye. So they're dressed in scarlet. The warriors are dressed in scarlet. The chariots are enveloped in flashing steel. When he is prepared to march, and the cypress spears are brandished. So you've got to think of warriors dressed in scarlet, ready for the battle, chariots flashing around the place, and then spears being brandished as part of their weaponry. Verse 4, the chariots race madly in the streets. They rush wildly in the squares. Their appearance is like torches. They dash because of the flashing of the sun on their metal parts, I suspect. They dash to and fro like lightning flashes. Well, there are two factors being laid out: the equipment of the attacker and the speed or furious movement of the scatterer. It's interesting, too, though, that those same two can be turned on to see action of those inside the walls preparing to defend the city, is of the scatterer that we're talking here. The warriors are ready for battle. They're dressed in red or scarlet, scarlet for combat shields as well. The combat shields could be either dyed red, or could be covered in blood, or they could be covered in copper, which when the sun shines on it would look reddish. Or they could be dyed red or covered in blood, as we said. The chariots were ready, stirred, and pumped up on adrenaline. So that's what we've got prepared to face the city of Nineveh. It seems that verse 3 describes the attacker in the suburbs racing toward the wall of Nineveh, which is why those inside the walls are scurrying to get into defensive mode. And verse 4 indicates Nineveh's furtive move to get prepared for the attack. So we've got both going on there. The Babylonians and the Medes are rushing toward the city walls from the suburbs. The city inside is stirring around to get into a defensive mode. Interestingly, let's take a look at Isaiah's description of Yahweh's summons of an army to judge and discipline his own nation. Looking at Isaiah 5, verses 26 through 30. A little bit longer passage here. He, Yahweh, will also lift up a standard to the distant nation, and will whistle it for it from the ends of the earth. And behold, it will come with speed swiftly. So whatever's going to happen, Yahweh is calling it. No one in it is weary or stumbles. None slumbers or sleeps, nor is the belt at its waist undone. They're girded up for battle. Nor is sandal strap broken. Everything is on pace, on target for the attack. Its arrows are sharp, and all its bows are bent. The hoofs of its horses seem like flint, and its chariot wheels like a whirlwind. It is roaring like a lioness, and it roars like young lions. Growls as it seizes the prey. and carries it off with no one to deliver it. This is the group that Yahweh has called to attack Judah. And it shall growl over it in that day like the roaring of the sea. If one looks to the land, behold, there is darkness and distress. Even the light is darkened by its clouds. And you remember God's description of the Babylonians that he gave Habakkuk. We've discussed that a couple of times in describing the coming judgment on Judah. This was Isaiah's version right here. Attention shifts momentarily to the king of the Assyrians as they scurry in preparation within the walls of Nineveh. I'm going to read verses 5 and 6 from Nahum 2. He remembers his nobles. They stumble in their march. They hurry to her, Nineveh's wall. And the mantlet is set up. The gates of the rivers are opened, and the palace is dissolved. The two verses can be a bit confusing. The verses can be a bit confusing as they appear to intermix the Assyrian call to arms and the enemy's attack. The gates, and there were 15 of these gates, are not the gates to the city. Gates in the dams controlling the flow of water from the smaller Kosar, K-O-H-S-R river, and Tibil 2 streams that flow through the city. What is apparently described is the enemy opening floodgates so that the 100-foot high city walls would crumble and fall. What happened was you open these floodgates, and especially if it's during the flood season, these floodgates opened could send water that would undermine the footing of these 100-foot high walls. And it seems that not only were these walls 100-foot high, but it seems that they had watchtowers that were even taller, up to about 200 feet high. And historical writings seem to imply that the Tigris River also flooded at this time. In any respect, the combined flow of water was undermining the wall itself, the 100-foot high wall and the higher towers. In any respect, the avalanche of water undermining the city walls was the major decisive turning point in the conflict. No walls, no defense. You remember we mentioned that God said it would be through a flood. The palace may be either the king's palace or the temple of Ishtar or Nabu. We don't know what palace was really implied at this particular point. Next time we're going to pick up from the flooding and continue with a blow-by-blow description of Nineveh's defeat and destruction